What's up, everybody? Once again, it's Angelo Gingerelli, stand-up comic and author of Stand Up and Laugh, which is a zine available right now on Microcosm Publishing. We're going through the audiobook / podcast version of that zine, and this is episode 4. We're going to cover more of the top 10 reasons to produce comedy shows, including proactively creating good shows, building local relationships, and building technical proficiency. So just 3 of the 10 reasons you should produce your own comedy shows and not wait for anybody else to help you. Because I'm telling you from experience, if you're waiting for other people, you're going to be waiting a long time, so go out and do it yourself. After we get past the beginning, we read the chapters, we got a great interview with 2 great comics. We got James Pietragallo and Jimmy Whisman. They're 2 stand-up comics. They're from Phoenix, Arizona. They tour all over the country, but they really kind of cracked the code and figured out how to get in the game with these podcasts they do. The first one being Small Town Murder, where they kind of take a murder that happened in a small town anywhere in America and just kind of really deep dive into it. They're 3-4 hours long, super in-depth. It's true crime mixed with comedy. In a way, I don't think anybody's really doing that. True crime podcast, I've been popular forever. Comedy podcast, I've been popular forever. I'm not sure anybody's mixing it as good as James and Jimmy are. And then their second podcast is Crime and Sports, where they take an athlete, a coach, someone in the sports world that you've heard about and know they've been in trouble with the law, and they go super deep on that person's history. They go back to their parents, talk about them as a kid, through high school, through college, through the professional ranks. If they're still getting in trouble when they're retired, that's also on the podcast. But it's the guys you know, the Lawrence Taylors, the Allen Iversons, the guys that have traditionally had trouble with the law, the J.R. Smiths. But then they go a little deeper than that. So it's not just the 4 major sports. They cover a lot of NASCAR, a lot of MMA, fighting type sports. James is a big wrestling guy. He's do a lot of wrestlers over the years. It's just they're 2 really funny podcasts. 2 guys kind of found their niche and found a way to really blow up way beyond Phoenix's comedy scene through these 2 podcasts, and it resulted in nationwide tours and 2 great podcasts. They're just cranking along, cranking out episodes, cranking out content, and they have crazy fans. So we're going to cover 3 more of the top 10 reasons to produce comedy shows, right into an interview with James Pietragallo and Jimmy Whisman. Let's go. Stand Up and Laugh. Build a comedy scene, produce your own shows, and create community by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com. If you're trying to make your way in the world of stand-up comedy, you can build your career while enlivening your local comedy community and mutually supporting your fellow humorists, and you can even have fun while doing it. Angelo Gingerelli shares his hard-won advice for anyone who wants to create a comedy scene from scratch in a smaller community, carve out their unique niche in a larger city full of professional funny people, or anywhere in between. Lots of good tips here for anyone organizing community events, from how to book venues, get publicity, and avoid drama. Also includes great arguments for starting or joining a comedy scene rather than thinking of yourself as a lone wolf, and solid wisdom for being an asset to an existing stand-up community. Stand Up and Laugh by Angelo Gingerelli is available now on microcosmpublishing.com. Top 10 Reasons to Produce Comedy Shows, Part 2. Number 5, builds local relationships. There are few things more important than solid relationships when building an arts entertainment scene. An expansive network of people in the area who can help stage and promote your events is absolutely necessary to continued success. This network is built by putting out a quality product, honoring your contracts, over-delivering on your promises, and being an overall good person for the entire community. These people learn your character through the caliber of your events and will hopefully remember that when they get the chance to promote or support you in the future. The more people you can call, text, email, or direct message about an event, the better the event's chance of success, and the better for your career and the entire scene. Bonus tip. The key word here is relationship. If you only deal with local media when you want coverage, or venues when you want to book the room, you can't be super surprised when they give that valuable space to somebody else. Invite them to your shows, put them on the guest list, repost their interesting articles, and create a symbiotic relationship where they become a part of the scene and take pride in contributing to its development. Number 6, builds technical proficiency. Putting on shows is an incredible educational experience. Setting up public address systems, arranging seating, positioning stage lighting, and producing a show that works not only for the audience, performers, venue, and staff, but will also resonate later on social media is a skill set can only be developed with experience. There's shockingly very limited information available on any of these topics. That's why I'm producing this podcast, why I wrote the zine, and why I'll hopefully eventually publish a book to help young comics out. Many artists in the mainstream entertainment industry have no idea what goes on behind the scenes of events to make them successful. People that have had a corporate machine behind them since they were teenagers probably have a limited knowledge of the actual nuts and bolts of their craft because they have been able to focus on their artistry while their team dealt with the technical side of the business. By contrast, comics who come up in smaller scenes are forced to learn all aspects of the game because of the DIY nature of performing as a truly independent entity. Early in my career, I was hosting a show in the side room of a bar/pizzeria with a local opening act and a well-known national headliner. When I went on stage and took the mic out of the stand to start the show, it was clear there were going to be audio issues because the mic would randomly start and stop picking up the sound of my voice. I put the mic back in the stand and yelled my material at the crowd. The room was small and filled to capacity, so it was kind of a struggle, but it basically worked. The opener struggled through her set because she kept trying to use the microphone and it kept malfunctioning. The headliner saw what was happening and realized the problem was that when the mic was removed from the stand, it lost connection with the cable attaching it to the public address system. He left the mic in the stand for his entire set and had a great show. This kind of, quote, know-how only happens with experience, and that experience only really happens by producing your own events and learning all aspects of the business. Such expertise could salvage one of your own shows from technical difficulties down the road. Number 7, builds reputation and resume. Most people believe that in terms of achieving comedy success, there's no substitute for being funny on stage. Crushing crowds and getting big laughs from a diverse audience is one surefire way to make progress in comedy. However, the problem with this, quote, cream rises to the top mentality is that if someone is killing it off the beaten path, it's hard for the comedy gatekeepers to find that hidden gem of a comic who happens to live hundreds of miles away from the mainstream scene. Beyond simply being talented, having a good, quote, comedy resume is another way to get booked on progressively bigger stages, more popular podcasts, and higher profile lineups. Putting on shows, hosting open mics, and generally being an asset to your local comedy scene builds your resume and earns you the reputation as one of the key comedy people in the area. This will open doors in the form of community groups contacting you for comedy fundraisers, local businesses approaching you to put on comedy shows in their venues, and producers bringing up your name to open for headliners when they come to town. These opportunities simply don't come to comics who wait to be offered stage time or who spend hours every day writing jokes just hoping somebody will invite them to perform on their show. The Stand Up and Laugh audiobook/podcast. It interviews some of the best names in comedy. We're talking about Chris Gethard, Jersey's own, host of New Jersey's the World, host of the Chris Gethard Show, host of the Beautiful Anonymous podcast. We got Johnny Brennan from the Jerky Boys, a game changer in the 90s, sold millions of albums of prank calls. We got from Arizona, James Pietragallo and Jimmy Whisman, the host of both the Crime and Sports and the Small Town Murder podcast. From the world of heavy metal, we got Don Jameson. He's been on MTV. He's been on VH1. He's on tour with literally every heavy metal hard rock band you ever heard of. From the Dirty South, we got Manny Garavito and Matthew Hahn. From Jersey again, we got John Pogromo, one of the finest touring comics to ever come out of the Jersey Shore. From Cleveland, Ohio, we got Jim Tews, made a documentary about Cleveland's comedy scene a couple years ago and been killing it ever since. We got some of the Jersey Shore's finest comics, including Joe Borzada, Eric Hollerbeck, Amalis Perduto, all coming to the game from different angles. From Instagram, we got Selena Kopic, the host and the voice behind the NYT Val's Instagram account. And from Comedy Fight Club, we got Matt Marin. The Stand Up and Laugh audiobook/podcast is available now wherever you listen to podcasts, and Stand Up and Laugh is available right now from microcosmpublishing.com. It's time for another interview segment on the Stand Up and Laugh podcast, the companion piece to Stand Up and Laugh, available now from Microcosm Publishing. This episode, we focused a lot of the interviews so far on the Northeast. This episode, we're going way out west to Arizona with two guys that I can't call myself anything but a fan of. They've done for a long time this Small Town Murder podcast, which is great, which is way funnier than anything about murder should be. And then they do maybe my favorite podcast, the Crime and Sports podcast. A couple of years ago, my one of my best friends, Metter Martin, turned me on to it. I listened to about 20 episodes in the span of a month and got caught up and just really went in on what they do. If you don't know about it, they take athletes that have been in trouble throughout their careers and go super deep dive into everything about them, from their parents' background to what they're doing right now in 2020 or 2020, whenever they're recording the episode. And it is just the most phenomenally well-researched, one of the funniest podcasts out there. Without further ado, I want you guys to welcome James Pietragallo and Jimmy Whisman. How you guys doing tonight?
So much.
Thank you for that. That was an amazing intro.
Yeah, man. Like I said, I can't call myself anything but a fan. And as a guy who, commutes to open mics and stuff like that, commutes to a day job and just runs a lot to stay in shape, your guys' podcast has been a companion on some great runs and some horrible commutes. So thank you very much. That being said, I want to start at the beginning. I know James, from being a fan, James is originally from New York, but I think started comedy kind of in Arizona. And Jimmy's from Arizona, if I'm correct. What was that scene like when you guys started? Were there open mics and showcases and stuff going on, or were you guys two of the first to start it? What was the scene like in Arizona whenever you guys started, whenever that was?
A lot of open mics.
Yeah.
There's a ton of open mics and bar shows.
Yeah.
That's where we started.
Right.
Doing terrible biker bar shows where people are playing pool in the background and they won't turn the TVs off.
Right.
And you're doing well if people stop playing pool to look at you. That's how you're doing. Like, hey, this is a good. This is working. That's how we started.
Yeah, we started comedy by doing comedy for people that didn't know that they were going to get comedy.
People with comedy.
I always thought, would you guys agree though, if you could crush in that environment, a club is somewhat easier? Like at the Jersey Shore, I do a lot of stuff in music and punk rock venues, right? And like if you could perform for that crowd that adamantly doesn't want to see comedy, going to a show is even a little bit easier than that sometimes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I always knew if I could get somebody to just stop playing pool and look at me for 5 seconds, that means in a club that would get an applause break.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And it turns out that's what ended up happening. And then we started doing they had a couple of when the comedy club Stand Up Live, which is a big 600-seater down in downtown Phoenix, they opened up right after, we were in it a year when they opened.
Yeah.
And they were doing showcases to try to find openers, and we participated in them. And I think we were the only ones who got work out of the whole showcase.
So. There was maybe 40 comics that were vying for opening gigs and hosting and feature work, if there was any, because most comics bring their feature with them on the road, so that it was a lot of host work. But luckily the clubs used us and then were appreciative. They liked us, and comics gave us reviews that were positive, so they used us more and more and more, and we ended up being regulars at the clubs between the Tempe Improv and Stand Up Live, and we're able to get enough work there to keep us busy. But as well as we do, comedy doesn't do well in terms of monetary gain for somebody that's an opener.
If you're hosting a show, even if there's 600 people there, you're making $50.
Right.
I mean, period. That's it. So I mean, that's to be a place from Thursday to Sunday and come home with $300 is really not.
You're making $1 an hour. You might as well be delivering pizzas.
Yeah.
One thing, and you guys bring it up on the show all the time, you guys keep it real about what comedy's like. You talk about what the road's like, how little financial gain there is in strictly stand-up, and we'll talk about how you parlay that into a successful podcast in a second. But the other favorite thing you do, I'm not a huge wrestling guy like James is, but the parallels between pro wrestling and stand-up comedy, I think, are phenomenal. And that's kind of made me get more into a lot of comics I'm friends with. They're way bigger wrestling guys than me, and I'll turn them on to your show, and they'll be like, "Oh, these guys are hitting on the head. This is exactly right."
It's the truth. They're both unforgiving businesses where they'll churn people up and they'll spit you right out if it's to somebody's just interest in that second.
Right.
Nobody cares. There's very little money, and unless you are drawing people to buy tickets, no one gives a shit about you, and you're treated like you're an interloper in the whole situation.
And then to add insult to injury, come February, you have 11 1099s.
For $100, $125, and you have to deal with that. Exactly.
As somebody who's a big sports fan, one thing I really respect about pro wrestling and comedy is what you just said is true, and it's out in the open. It's not like some of the other sports that try to be family friendly, drug testing, all these lies. pro wrestling and stand up, it's kind of, everybody knows. It's kind of, if you're going to get in this ring, you're going to play by our rules. If it works for you, good. 99% of you guys, it ain't going to work for, and we're moving on. But I do respect the reality of that. They don't hide it like some other sports do.
Yeah.
No, they don't. And it's a matter of both of those are whatever you need to do to get ready to perform is also the thing. Because we've always said this. We could be in a green room when we go to we do a live show with Small Time Murder where we're in a green room.
Yeah.
If we've sold out the theater, they could walk in, the manager could walk in, and we could have 3 dead women in a corner piled up with a mountain of blow, and they would be like, get you guys anything? Like, they wouldn't even look twice at it because whatever they need to do, that's how it is. It's the same with wrestling.
I could have one of the women opened up and dining on her guts, and the club would be like, we're going to push till 8:10. Is that okay?
We'll start the music. You come out at 8:10. They don't care.
I host the longest running open mic in New Jersey at a heavy metal bar right by the beach, right? Yeah. It's on Mondays for the last 3 years. I never drink if I'm running the mic because I consider it work. You know what I mean? I'm running the room, I'm making everybody comfortable, whatever. But I might go back another night in the week, see a band, see a rapper, whatever, and have a beer or two, right? And if the staff sees me holding a beer, they're like, "That a boy, way to go." I'm like, what the what world do we live in where this behavior is celebrated, but just being sober and taking care of business is frowned upon?
That's what it is.
But I'd rather them be doing that than the alternative of looking to us and pro wrestlers to be the beacon of morality, because that that's not okay either.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Problems.
Yeah,
that's why we're doing this. We have a lot of issues.
So an episode, I think in 2020, James made a really good point. He said there's a million miles between I'll sign up for the open mic and having people come out to see you and buy tickets and sell out a 100-seat arena, right? Yeah. There's the same thing in podcasts. Anybody with a mic and an email address can start a podcast. There's a big step between that and what you guys do with Patreons and producers and 100 people you shout at every episode and having a following where you can take the show on the road. How does the podcast start? How do you guys meet each other? And how does it go from, 2 guys talking about sports, talking about crimes, to the tours and the donations and stuff you guys are doing now?
It starts, with a relationship with somebody that you trust. That's first.
We met in a sleazy hotel parking lot. That's how we met.
That's how trust begins.
Yes. We were introduced by a very drunken Scotsman comic friend of ours that said, "You two are the biggest assholes I know, and I think you'd get along," and literally made us meet him at the sleazy hotel we lived in and introduced us because he thought we'd get along, and we did immediately. So
that's the start, and then you have to have common interest and trust in that common interest of whatever you're building. And I don't know beyond that, because we both say constantly, there's no blueprint, I don't think, especially for what we've done.
Yeah. I wanted to start a podcast because I listened to podcasts since before Apple Podcasts was a thing. Before even the podcast app on that, when you had to go to people's websites and download their shit right from there. I've been listening since then, 2008, 2007. So I always thought it was something that we should do. And I just never had somebody. I always wanted to do it with somebody. And then we always talked on the phone for hours at a time.
Yeah.
And we were both laughing about athletes that are very famous and very wealthy getting arrested all the time. And I was like, we should do a sports, crime update week, once a week, hey, this is what's happened in sports crime this week. And somehow it went from that to, well, let's just pick a guy and we'll do it. And we just kind of started it, we didn't have a big structure and a big whatever. We were I said, well, I watched the Ray Caruth trial back in the day. Right. So that could be our first episode. And that was really it. And we just went with it. And then we just kind of developed it like you do with an act. You start to hone it. You start to figure out this works, this doesn't work.
And then we started to turn it into a format where now it has an obvious place that the show goes. You can plug in any asshole and they all work the same, where they go from birth to present day. There's a grace. There's a point where somebody needed to talk to them and have a heart-to-heart.
Or it didn't. They ignored it. One or the other.
And there's it all turns into the same story in a different light and a different way. They all do the same shit.
just real quick aside, I'm a huge fan of when the person's moment of grace is when they're like 9 years old. When that's like the best it's going to get, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
I love when I say that. Jimmy's like, "Oh God, wow, that was fast." He doesn't.
Or he's born Ray Caruth. Great. Like those are the best.
Yeah.
Things go left right away for some of these guys.
Yeah.
Grace.
So I got one more question about the podcast itself and the mechanics of it. How long do you research for each episode to crank them out week after week? This isn't just two guys joking around. There's a ton of backstory and research that goes on for every episode.
Yeah.
I feel like I do the research. I really want every fact and every little thing possible, because I feel like if we're going to make jokes about a situation, then we really have to know what we're talking about and know where the jokes can be. Because if we make a joke and then I didn't look up one fact and then, we actually made fun of something that we shouldn't have in the joke. So I feel like the more prepared we are, the more we can be dicks about it, because we have all the information. So it's almost like if you go on stage as a stand-up, you don't want to go on stage. A lot of people like to go up with like some half-formed idea.
Yeah, that's
I'm
crazy.
not a half-formed idea guy. Like, I'll have it. If I come up with a joke, I'm not doing it on stage for like 6 months while I work it out in my head. You know what I mean? I'm not I thought of that today, I'll spit it out. I just don't do that shit. So I'm the same way with this. I want to be prepared. I want to have everything. And I don't know. It's got to be 40 hours a week I'm doing on the research. It's a lot.
It's a full-time job worth of effort and energy that he does to get a show created and not even scripted, because it's not really scripted. No. The only script that we have is this date he did this date he did that. Yeah. That's the only script we've really got to follow. And so the story is just, it's public records and following a timeline, and then from there we build on that first take and
There's
then
so much
upload.
Ridiculous shit out there from these people. I mean, come on. He was talking about Pocket Robin guy on Small Town Murder. This guy had got birds in his pocket like hand fruit. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. You can't be eating birds out of your pocket. That's insane.
Yeah, you guys have really done a special job of taking just crazy behavior and making it hilarious somehow.
That's really what.
I don't know how else you'd even cover it.
Yeah, right. I don't know how you can do that in I don't know how Bill Curtis could possibly say that on.
He kept a robin in his pocket to snack on later. That would sound ridiculous.
Moving on to the next point. Bill, you've got to comment further.
Yeah, back to that, dude.
Give me your opinion, Bill, because that's fucking crazy.
So once the podcasts are off the ground and you're starting to develop a following, how does that change your comedy career? Does that start to open up spots outside of Arizona? Does that get you headlining spots in Phoenix? How does it snowball? And for two comics that have done probably as good in the podcast game as you could possibly do at this point, what's the momentum like? What's the grind like? And what does it do for your career as a comic?
Well, we can go.
Sure.
I mean, we can go do shows and headline and do what we want now if we want to. But we just find it to be, right now, we really like doing the live podcast because we get at stand-up, but it's more fun.
I love stand-up, and I want to do stand-up a lot.
We love it, but
I'm also lazy, and I've got things that I have to do here, and then to balance that with going on the road. Like Dan Cummins still tours a lot doing comedy, and then so he does Time Suck, and then he does a podcast with his wife, and another one
this year. Now he says cutting back his stand-up dates because there's too much going on with the podcast.
That's unbelievable, and that's a guy that started in comedy and turned it into now he just does podcasts.
Like 8 albums for Christ's sake, and he's paring it back just a drop because the podcasts are. And they're fun. We get to do on stage when we do a live show. What we get to do on stage is it's just different than stand-up. Right. We can have a different kind of conversation with our audience, and we can do it together, which is fun. And we love stand-up too, and we'll do stand-up here and there. But it's there's just something about that's way more rewarding.
And the opportunities that open up for stand-up, the money monetary wise for doing stand-up versus doing a podcast, I'd rather go do the podcast and make more money with somebody that I like and doing it for a bigger audience in bigger venues, and it's just more fun.
That's part of the reason why we don't have like a band that breaks up situation. Is we know we're worth more together than separately. You know what I'm saying? We know we're bread is butter. Yeah. We're not stupid, and we're people who really grinded for a long time and stand up and tried our asses off, and we found something here that's successful, and we're like, we're not going to fuck this up.
Like, I really appreciate. I always say if I did music, I would have two goals. One would to have an album that I hated so much but made me so much money I had to perform it live, right? Yeah. And second, be in a band with people I couldn't stand the sight of but have to go on tour because we're making money hand over fist.
Yeah.
So that being said, man, what advice would you have to let's say a high school kid, 20-year-old kid in Phoenix or a city like that, kind of off the beaten path, not Chicago, not New York, not LA, if they want to get started in the stand-up podcasting world, what advice would you give them in 2021, the way the world is now?
Podcasting would be easy. Podcasting would be get a mic and do it as much as you can and get as good as you can doing it, because every rep that you do, just like stand-up, every rep you're getting better and better. Yeah. And then you don't need anybody to let you do that. You get a mic, you put it out, you can put out 5 episodes a week if you want. Yeah. If it's just you want to practice and then parlay that into another show. Stand-up is different. Stand-up, I mean, Jesus Christ, it's such a hit. It's so personal to everybody else, because most people that I've seen doing stand-up, even when we came up, my advice to them would be to stop doing stand-up because they're not fucking good at it. And that's it. When you go on an open mic and there's 10 comics, 8 of them shouldn't fucking be there. Right. And you know that. Right. They shouldn't have stage time, but they're there, and we need to fill out the lineup, and they're nice guys and a nice girl, and so whatever.
They're fun to hang out with.
They're fun to hang out with.
They're a good hang, as we say on the East Coast. The guy's a good hang. He's a good comic, not always.
Yeah,
exactly.
The one thing I say all the time, if you look at this is a little bit of cliche, but Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, right? You got to do an activity for 10,000 hours. If you want a podcast for 10,000 hours, you could sit at your computer and grind it out and maybe never be great, but get better, right? What I always say, the hard thing is in stand-up, particularly if you're not in New York or do 5 mics a night, you got to spend 2-3 hours of your life for 5 minutes of stage time, which if you look at the idea of amassing enough reps to do that is it's 10,000 hours of comedy, but it's 30 to 40,000 hours of your life.
Impossible.
It's crazy. It absolutely is. And we used to do that too. I'd run around to 3 open mics in a night in Phoenix, and we'd do that, and it would be for nothing.
And then the alternative is getting good enough to be an opener in the clubs, and then latching on with a comedian that tours and be his feature on the road, making no money, but you're still getting 30 minutes a night or an hour. Right, and they don't. they pray you don't get better, because then they can't follow you, or you leave them.
That's the NFL franchise that's got a quarterback that's about 35. Then they draft a rookie and they ask the veteran to tutor the rookie to get better. Why would he ever do that? They're taking food out of that kid's mouth. Why would you ever do that?
Exactly.
And that's kind of the angle that we chose, was to build something on our own, to do it on our own path. And, and I was telling James this the other day, when I started in comedy and when we were in the clubs, it feels like a fraternity, like we're all one and we're all part of the same thing. But that's not the case when you are selling tickets and competing with them in a different market. When we're in Cincinnati selling a club and another comic is there, I don't see them tweeting, "Hey, these are comics that opened for me when I was in Phoenix. They're in Cincinnati." Nobody does that. That's not a thing.
They won't even have us on their goddamn podcast.
No.
Even though ours have more listeners than theirs.
Right.
Shit.
It would help them to be on our show, and they won't do it.
I always say it's a weird dichotomy of competitive and collaborative to do this. In a small scene like I am at the Jersey Shore, I always preach like we get working together, to use a cliche, the rising tide rises all ships, right? Yeah. But at some point, if only one ship is getting a Netflix special, now we got to go to war. Now I got to try to feed my family if I can, right? But until I get to that point, I'm cool to host the mics and have people on my podcast and help everybody out with the idea of eventually one of us fights our way out of this.
Yeah. You're a problem in Jersey, aren't you?
No, dude, I'm good.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
You're supposed to go against the grain. And that's what I noticed about Phoenix comedy, was that it was starting to turn into this like crowd of dudes that were just friends with each other and love just doing friend shows. And this is so and so.
And shit, and you're like, worry about your jokes.
Right.
Fuck what karaoke song you're doing when you're done with the show.
I'm here to try to make money at this someday, not sing Roxanne.
Yeah. Right. One book that I noticed that you were absolutely right is if you're in a scene like you are, where there's not a million shows to do, create your own stage time. You can do that. find a place that'll let you put a mic there so you can talk into it. If you need to do it and there's nowhere to do it, make your way to do it. And that's amazing. That's great. You got to hustle like that.
And in comedy, the strong survive. So if you think you do a better show than somebody else could, and you put that together, and that show is better, their show will suffer because people won't go to that show. They'll come to your show. And that's what comedy should be. It should be a competitive market where the best shows survive. Those shit shows should die off. But in Phoenix, the shit shows last longer than the good shows.
Yeah, because everybody supports each other too much.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of they go on forever and nobody.
And then you got somebody saying, I do the longest running bar show in Phoenix. And it's like, yeah, but it sucks, man.
But yeah, if you have a dozen friends that come out to your stuff and they're drinkers, you could do that show forever where I live.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And are you really getting better or doing any, are you really accomplishing anything? The answer is probably no in most of those cases. Real quick, I'm going to let you guys go in 1 second, but as far as in comedy to strong survive, I'm a runner as well. Like I run marathons, and I always say I'm not a gifted athlete by any means, but I can be miserable longer than anybody else. And I think you can't out miserable me. So like the natural progression of my adult life has been marathon running and stand-up comedy because I could just be a glutton for punishment longer than everybody around me.
You are really good at seeing the similarities of things. That's amazing.
Man.
That's a great point.
Excellent
point.
Thank you, guys. Hey, is there anything you guys want to leave me or the listeners with before we wrap it up and shout out your social media and your plugs?
You know, I would just say if you really love comedy and you will not quit, keep going and do something different than everybody else does.
I would say also self-evaluation is a big thing.
It's so key.
It's big. Look at something and go, that sucked.
Yeah.
I didn't do that well. That sucked. I need to fix it. Not, I'll find an audience that likes it better. You know what I mean?
10 out of 10 audiences are not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at the end, even if it is funny, if no one's laughing at it, then it's kind of, is it funny then if a tree falls in the forest? You know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
And podcasting consistency. If you're starting a podcast, consistency. Got to come out the same time every week. It's got to come out every week. The subject, it has to be consistent. That's what people want. They want to know what they're getting when they tune in. Yeah. Just like a TV show, just like a radio show that people listen to for 10 years, just like, you know, anything like that. It has to be consistent. That's my only advice for that.
Great advice. I really appreciate it. I know the listeners will. Where do we find you guys online? Obviously Crime and Sports, obviously Small Town Murder. Where else?
Shutupandgivememurder.com is our website, and that's where all of our tour dates and information for everything that is us is there. That's where you find us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you guys very much. I can't wait for the next episode of Crime and Sports. Again, signing off, it's Angelo Gingerelli for the Stand Up and Laugh podcast, available now from Microcosm Publishing with Jimmy Whisman and James Pietragallo from one of my favorite podcasts, Crime and Sports.
Thank you, man.